Today I'm going to be chatting about all the books I read in the month of January. In January, I read 8 books and I had an average rating of a 3.0, which is a pretty good way to kickstart the year. As always, I'm going to be going in order from my lowest rated to my highest rated book. But first, I'll be giving a quick recap on my January TBR. Since January is the first month in a very long time that I did a monthly TBR video, I'll let you know how true to my TBR I actually was. In my January TBR video, I talked about completing a reading project. I teased one book for that project, which was James, and I did complete that reading project, which included 5 books. I talked about completing the Throne of Glass series by finishing Kingdom Bash, which I successfully did in January, so I'll be telling you my rating and final review of that and my whole thoughts on the entire series. I had 2 5-star predictions that I wanted to read in January, including The Tainted Cup and The Examiner. I definitely did not get to The Examiner. I did not have time, so that one is pushing into my February TBR. And then The Tainted Cup, I'm actually in the middle of right now, and there's still a couple days left in January, so I am going to actually finish it in January, but I'm having to pre-record this video a little bit because when you're seeing this video, I'm currently on vacation in Japan, and I didn't want to wait a long time for you guys to see this video, so I pre-recorded a little bit. So The Tainted Cup, I'll tell you about in next month's wrap-up. I don't have my full final thoughts on that one yet. I talked about 4 arcs that I wanted to read, and there's only one that I did not get to, which is Little Mysteries. That one's going to be in my February reading instead. And that was it. So I pretty much read everything I had set out for my January TBR. There were only a couple of things that didn't fully make it in the month. And by now you've also seen my February TBR video, so I have decided to continue that for another month. And I also did reading prompts this time. So if you missed that video, you can go back and watch it. It's my most recent video and see what I have teed up for February. And now we can get into my January wrap up. First up is the one singular book that I DNF'd this month, which was The Darkest Night. This is an arc that I had. It was 22 short horror stories. And if you've seen one of my recent videos where I talk about taking a break on my horror themed read-a-thon that I do, you'll have heard that I'm just not really vibing with horror as much right now. And so I think that was part of the reason that I wasn't really connecting with this. I tried the first couple of stories and my rating just kept going down and down the more that I read the stories. So I decided that there was just nothing making me want to read it, and I was only going to be pushing myself through it for the sake of pushing myself through it if I kept going. So that one was a DNF for me. There was one book that I chose not to rate this month, and that is You Dreamed of Empires by Alvaro Enrique. This was part of the reading challenge that I did where I was reading New York Times 5 best fiction books of 2024. And this book, I just did not feel like I had it in me to put a rating on it, because if you watch that video, which I recommend you do because I think it was a fun one and it was just something a little bit different for me, you'll have seen that this was just a challenging read for me, and I don't feel like I fully absorbed the story, so it wouldn't make sense to put a rating on it. Like, experience-wise, I just didn't have the best experience with it. It's a story set in the 1500s about a Spanish conquistador coming to this town, and then it's like political war games and manipulation and psychological stuff that is going on throughout the events of this visit. There were some things that I liked, like it would pull me into the story sometimes and I fully knew what was going on, but there's a lot of really unfamiliar names. A lot of people have multiple names and titles. There's 2 different sides and you've got to keep up with who all these people are. The city names are names I was unfamiliar with. So it's a lot of language that was very unfamiliar to me. I was having trouble keeping up with who the characters were. There are often not dialogue tags used in the speech, and not even quotation marks used around dialogue, and not even dialogue put on separate lines, just kind of all meshed together. So it was a very hypnotic reading experience where I wasn't always sure what was going on. There's some dream sequences in the book as well. Clearly it is critically acclaimed, but for me personally, I just didn't have the best experience with it, so I just decided to put no rating on it. I had one 1-star read this month, and that is Cross My Heart by Megan Collins. This is an arc that I had through NetGalley, and it is already starting the year off poorly when it comes to new thriller releases. I have not been having a good time with thrillers in a long time. I just feel like thrillers have gone downhill for me as mysteries have gone uphill. I so prefer a mystery, a classic kind of mystery feel. I love when a book knows it's a mystery. It's like self-aware in the mystery. It's kind of meta, breaking the fourth wall with you. Those are my favorite types of mysteries to read right now. Thrillers are just not working for me very much anymore, especially newer thrillers, like recently released thrillers. I've been hoping 2025 would be a better year, and I'm still hopeful. I'm not gonna let one book determine this for me, but man, kicking off with a 1-star thriller is not the way to go. The concept of this book is that you're following this woman who has received a heart transplant, and then she becomes obsessed with her donor's husband. So the woman whose heart she has, she's now obsessed with that woman who's no longer with us because she has her heart. She's obsessed with her husband and then starts contacting him. And the book started off strong. It kind of had this You by Carolyn Kepnes energy to it. I was like, oh, okay, who's gonna be the villain? Who's gonna be the crazy one? What's gonna happen? This is gonna be a game of obsession in multiple ways. Maybe it'll be a cat and mouse game. Those are the types of thrillers I enjoy. I thought, okay, let's see what's gonna happen. The writing quality off the bat was not very good. I just did not like the writing style in it very much, but I was intrigued by the premise, so I was giving it a chance. Structurally, it's also interesting because you get her main point of view, you get his point of view in emails that he writes to his friend, and then they're also emailing each other through the donor platform anonymously, so they don't know who the other one is. I mean, she knows who he is, but he doesn't know who she is, and they're emailing through that too, so it's a lot of interesting different layers to the story. And then about halfway through the story, something happens, and I was like, okay, where's it gonna go? And then it goes somewhere, and it lost me. And the second half, I just did not like. I felt like it was pretty obvious who the bad guy was. There's not a very large cast in this book, so you have a limited amount of options to choose from, and it just did not thrill me. It didn't surprise me. I also, like I said, the writing just wasn't great. Like, I felt like all these characters, instead of being characters who felt like three-dimensional people separate from one another, every character read the exact same to me, as if it was written by the same author, which obviously it is written by the same author, but they felt like, you know, just the same character invented over and over and over again with a different name and appearance on them instead of feeling like distinct people. And the ending had this like Scooby-Doo quality to it in a bad way. So I liked the first half, I liked the setup, I was looking past the writing not being great, but by the second half and where the story goes, it just all continued to fall apart for me the longer that I went on. So yeah, it was a 1 star, did not love it. I think this is the first thing I've ever read from this author, and I was fully convinced this was their debut book while I was reading it. I was like, oh, this just feels like the clunkiness of a debut, and then I realized this is not their debut work. So I don't know. I don't think this is gonna be the author for me, but also our thriller is still gonna be for me. I don't know. Hopefully things take a better turn as the year goes on. In the New York Times Reading Challenge video that I did, I had 2 stars. Those were Martyr and All Fours. So I'll tell you about both of them. Let's start with Martyr. I was really looking forward to this book. I had really high hopes for it because I'd heard about it last year. It was one of those books that was just always on my radar, but I never made the time to pick it up. It's about this guy who is obsessed with the concept of martyrdom. He is really meditating throughout this story on what is the point of dying? Like, how do you make your death purposeful? He's had a lot of people around him die, and some in these ways that feel really insignificant, and he is just really obsessing over this concept of martyrdom. And the story's told through his perspective. He also sort of goes on this journey throughout the story, and then you also get a lot of other perspectives interspersed throughout the story from these people in his life. While it sounded so good in concept, it just did not really work for me in execution. It ended up dragging on. I was wanting to feel more of a plot consistently pulling me through the story, and there is a sort of surprise and a thing that does pull it together at the end, but all collectively it just didn't work as well for me. In individual pieces and parts, I would like the chapters I was reading, but put it all together and the full book just didn't have a very satisfying feel for me. But I know a lot of people really loved this and really connected to it. So if it's on your radar, still check it out. I might have just had my hopes up too high. All Fours is a story about this woman who is mid-40s and she's married and she has a child, and she decides that she wants to take this road trip from LA to New York, which is very unlike her, but she's trying to step out of her box and prove that she's someone that she's not. She gets on this road trip, she makes it 30 minutes down the road, she stops at a motel, and she never goes any further, and she stays in that motel for weeks, even though she lies to her husband and says that she is making this journey to New York. The story follows her through her time in that motel and the following things that happen after that. While she's in this town where this motel is, she ends up meeting someone, having an intimate experience with him, and that kind of kicks off the journey that she goes through, her arc, as she's having all these thoughts about her experience as a woman, her experience as a wife, her experience as a mother, her own sexuality. It's just an exploration of all of those things. I like books that do all of those things. I did not like this book. I found this main character to be very pretentious and very out of touch, very difficult to relate to, and I don't always need to relate to my characters, but with all of the things that she was doing, the decisions she was making, the way she was coming across, the things she was saying, I almost needed to know that it was coming from a satirical lens from the author for me to enjoy it, and it just didn't. It felt like it was coming from an authentic, genuine place that I just was not meshing with. I just found the main character to be wildly insufferable. I didn't really care for the ending either, like the way this goes and the way it all wraps up. It just didn't say anything to me. You know, you're looking for a book like this to say something to you, and it said nothing to me. So although it's called All Fours, it was only a 2. Next, I have a 2.5 star, which is The Rainfall Market. This is another arc that I read this month, and this is set up to be this cozy fantasy story about this place where there's a rainfall market, and during the rainy season, if you get a ticket, you get invited to the rainfall market, and you can go, and there's this pawn shop, and you can give all your misfortunes to this pawn shop, and in exchange, you get the opportunity to go searching through the rainfall market to find a better life. It's all through the tangible concept of these orbs. So you get this orb and you imbue all your misfortune into it. You exchange that from the pawn shop. You get some coins for that. And then you go and you try to find an orb that you want, that you resonate with. And then that's the new life that you get to walk away from the market with. You're following your main character, Saren, who is a young girl who's going through this journey. She is accompanied by a cat companion, which was really cute. And I liked the story in the beginning, but the main thing that made me rate it low was that I was going into this expecting an adult story, and it reads very young adult or even potentially middle grade. It has a very simplistic writing style. It is very chapter book sort of feel. She's a young girl. It feels like the story's coming from the perspective of a young girl. The language feels like it's written for a young person to read and comprehend. Stories like this, I just really like to read and resonate with the concept, like the philosophical question of like, if you could make your life different, what would you do? What would that mean? What would you sacrifice? You know, like how do we all think about our lives? I love stories like that. I read them all the time. This one was just so simple and predictable and just like very foundational baseline that it didn't make an impression on me. I'm pretty sure this is marketed as an adult novel. I could be wrong. If it's marketed for a younger audience, that's my mistake. And then, you know, it's a fine book, but that's why I gave it a 2.5 because I feel pretty neutral on it. I don't think it's great for adults. I think it would be a good introductional type of story for a younger reader. Next is the moment I know you've all been waiting for. My final thoughts on Kingdom of Ash and the Throne of Glass series. I'm just kidding. I know this is not, you know, what you come here for. A lot of people probably skip this because you don't care what I think about this fantasy series that is so wildly old and so wildly off base from what I typically read. But if you are one of the few who do care, who have been following this journey, I am here to tell you Kingdom of Ash received a 3.5 star rating for me, and I can tell you my full thoughts on the series. Probably won't really get into any spoilers. I think I can just talk about it generally. This book was freaking long. This book was so long, nearly 1,000 pages. The longer you go in the series, the longer the books get, and they just feel unnecessarily long. This one felt unnecessarily long. It felt repetitive. There's a lot of war and strategy built up in this one. Kind of felt like the same thing over and over again, where we'd get into a scene that's like, oh no, are we in danger? Let's fight a battle, everything's okay. Oh no, are we in danger? Let's fight a battle, everything's okay. Just over and over and over. The beginning portions of this pick up from 2 books ago where, God, what even are they called? Empire of Storms? Where Empire of Storms left off, I think. Something drastic happens to your main character in that one. This book picks up off of that because in Tower of Dawn, you go read back in time another character's perspective of something else going on. And I liked seeing that and how that was going to wrap up. That was very tense. But then after that, you know, it's just the fallout of the fantasy series. We got to fight this big war. We got to fight the big bad. We got to bring everyone back together because all these people have been separated for so long. And now they all come back together and they see each other. And of course it ends on a good note. Like the good people win, the bad people lose. You know what kind of arc to expect in a story like this, and so it dragging on for 1,000 pages took a long time, but there were things I enjoyed in it. There were pieces I enjoyed. That's why I got a 3.5 star rating. I think in general, the series as a whole, I'll show you how I rated each book, and then all of that averaged together averages as a 3.5 star rating, which is what I would think anecdotally is what I would say, that the whole series is about a 3.5 for me, which is exactly what it averages out to. My favorites were around the beginning, the middle, and the end with The Assassin's Blade, Queen of Shadows, and Tower of Dawn. My least favorite was Heir of Fire, and everything else in between sat at that 3.5 star rating. I really think I just needed more people to die in this book. As much as that would have been painful, it would have been a feeling, you know? It would have been a feeling. And I wanted Sarah J. Maas to go there, to kill off some more people, to make me feel emotional things. And it just felt so safe, and it felt predictable, you know? So that's why I didn't love this one and why I didn't feel like it had this huge satisfying conclusion. And that's sort of how I felt about the series as a whole. It was all okay. There were high points for me. There were low points for me. In general, it felt really long in certain places. It felt repetitive in places. I wasn't as invested in the main characters as I wanted to be in places. I ended up getting more invested in some side characters. Also though, like every side character and the relationship pairing kind of just reads the same to me. It's hard for people to feel super distinct. There's obviously characteristics about them that are different, but I don't feel like I was connected to the romances in different ways. I felt like I was connected to them all in the same base level way. So it just didn't feel like as complex and as emotionally, or getting me as emotionally invested in it as I wanted to. I didn't have a terrible time with it. It was an interesting experience. My first time reading a series this long. I just don't think I'm ever going to be someone who is like, yes, I love this series, you have to read it. I'm just like, it's all right. You know, if you want to read it, read it. And if you don't want to read it, I think you're going to be okay. And then I had 2 5-star books from the New York Times video I did, which were James and Good Material. So I'll start by telling you about James. This is a retelling of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, except this time you're getting the perspective of an enslaved man named James. Goes by Jim in the story for the most part, and it tells the adventures that he goes on with Huckleberry Finn as they both run away from their homes for different reasons, and they travel down the Mississippi River and they end up encountering all of these scenarios. There's a lot of depictions of the antebellum South, obviously, throughout this story, so there's a lot of horrific things, but there's also moments of levity and comedy in some ways. And in general, the whole story just has this really vibrant feel of adventure. It's very cinematic and it's very perfectly executed. So that's why I gave it a 5-star. I think it was just a perfect book. It really got me immersed in the story a lot more than I expected it to, for this to be something that I typically would not gravitate towards. I'm not usually a big reader of historical fiction. I'm not usually a big reader of books that I know will encapsulate a lot of human suffering, which with this following a slave, I knew that it would. And I think Percival Everett just really nailed it with this story. It feels like an instant classic, and I'm definitely interested in reading more from Percival Everett in the future. Good Material is a story of a breakup that comes from the man's perspective. You're following a guy named Andy who is dating this woman named Jen. Jen breaks up with Andy, and then you're following his experience in the fallout of that breakup, just going through all the very many lows and the occasional highs of going through a breakup. It's a very simple story in concept. You're really just following the fallout of a breakup, but it is wildly relatable because of that. I mean, who has not gone through a breakup? Who has not gone through a heartbreak? And it was a very fresh, interesting perspective to get this from a man's perspective, which is just not what I typically am reading. I usually see the perspective of this woman who is going on this empowerment journey after going through a breakup. And in this one, you're kind of following this man going through the dumps after being dumped. And in some cases, you're rooting for him. In some cases, you're maybe not, but the book's not really asking you if you want to root for him or not. It's just kind of taking you on this really relatable human journey with this character. This author writes humans so well. They felt so authentic. There were so many funny moments in this, emotional moments in this. It had me teary in moments. When I finished it, I just wanted to read even more. I have been thinking about this book nonstop since I finished it. It's just exactly the types of stories that I'm into right now. Just really, you know, authentic books that have this kind of cozy feel to them for some reason. So I absolutely love this. I will definitely be reading more from Dolly Alderton in the future, and this is probably the biggest surprise of the video. I was still surprised that I gave James a 5-star as well, but I knew this was really critically acclaimed, so I thought, you know, it's got to be a pretty good book. This I knew was popular with like romance readers. I didn't know that I was gonna love it as much as I did, so it was a nice surprise. So that's it for all the books I've read in the month of January. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!